Finally tonight, as we mark 20 years since the 9/11 attacks that changed history, former ABC News correspondent Ann Compton experienced that history like few others, traveling on board Air Force One, covering then President Bush as the day unfolded. So I recently had a chance to speak with Ann about her reflections and what 9/11 means 20 years later.
We just got a report in that there's been some sort of explosion at the World Trade Center.
It was just minutes before Good Morning America was supposed to end on September 11th, 2001.
We don't know if it would have been deliberate or accidental. We know so little now.
But the hours ahead would become a day no one would ever forget.
We just saw another plane coming in from the side.
Our belief at the moment is that an aircraft has crashed into either the courtyard itself or into that particular side of the building. There is simply no way to accurately describe the emotion this evokes.
Anchor Peter Jennings and ABC News correspondents across the country were there to guide us through the day.
I was actually in the subway heading towards the World Trade Center right around Franklin Street, and after the first explosion, the subway station started to fill with smoke.
I was told by one of the White House staffers that their security official came in and said everybody should leave in an orderly fashion, and about a minute later an agent ran in and said, just run.
A number of sources told me tonight that a number of passengers and flight attendants were able to dial 911 and also reach some of their relatives.
If you're a parent, you got a kid in some other part of the country, call them up.
As the day unfolded, one correspondent was there to update us on then President George W. Bush.
Ann Compton, who's been with the president all day, is on the phone.
He and what skeleton staff are with him down into an underground bunker where Ari Fleischer tells me the president is going to chair a National Security Council meeting.
Ann was one of the few reporters on 9/11 on board Air Force One, with no telling where the plane would go next.
We took off in Air Force One from Florida, where he first got word of this, and we literally, Peter, have been flying at well over 40,000 feet. We are leaving. And
where are you going, Annie?
Peter, I have no idea.
Peter, I think the most striking thing about today was the sense of being traveling with the President of the United States who was running with no place to hide.
Now, 20 years later, Ann tells us what she remembers about that day in the skies above a nation under attack.
Ann, if you can take us back to that day, Emma Booker Elementary in Sarasota, Florida, that morning, kind of replay those moments when someone comes in and whispers into the president's ear.
It was a quiet day, the last stop on a 3-day trip. The agenda was education. He'd given the speech a million times. So in this innocent setting, I was stunned to see White House Chief of Staff Andy Card come into the classroom and whisper to the president. Nobody interrupts a president, even in front of a classroom of second graders. But what forced me to write down in my reporter's notebook, 9:07 a.m., Andy whispers, was the look on President Bush's face. There was a gravity to it that was stunning. Andy stepped back, and I caught his eye. We had heard there had been a plane crash, and I made the sign of an airplane with my hand. Andy Card nodded and put up 2 fingers. That was the confirmation that this wasn't some tragic accident. It strikes me that looking back 20 years later, what we know now is what the president knew at that moment, and we did not. The president had already asked the intelligence community, what could al-Qaeda do to hurt Americans on U.S. soil? And that whisper was his answer.
When did the magnitude of the moment really hit you?
Actually, at the school, those of us traveling with the president, and even the president himself, knew so much less than everybody else in the country. We weren't by a television set watching the first plane and watching the second plane. So I figured it was bad when the president stood up, said, excuse me, he went into the other room. We were rushed out of the school classroom, just the small travel pool that was in the back of the classroom, rushed out the door into a school parking lot.
At what point did it really hit you as far as taking your reporter hat off and the implications of this as a citizen?
I don't think there was ever a moment when the emotional side, the personal fear side of this ever hit. Even when we raced off to the airport, boarded Air Force One, and as soon as we got on Air Force One, we learned the Pentagon had been hit. So we knew we weren't going back to Washington. I wasn't scared for us in the plane. I wasn't afraid for the president's safety. I was appalled and shocked and heartbroken for the people on the ground.
And then take us back to the first time you get on the air with Peter Jennings, and you have just a few facts, and there's so much chaos.
The only way I could file my pool reports to the rest of the White House press corps in Florida and to the world was to call into ABC News, where they patched me immediately through to Peter Jennings live on the air.
President Bush is here at the home of the Strategic Command.
And I'm talking into a little Motorola clamshell flip phone, but it had pretty good signal. All I could tell Peter Jennings and the world was that the president said this was apparent terrorist attack. He was returning to Washington. But I also knew that the Secret Service takes any threat anywhere and assumes it is a diversionary tactic, and the real target is the president of the United States. So at that moment, my job was to say, the president's safe, he's on move, he's going to be on the airplane, and we have no idea where we're going.
And what was that like for you, boarding Air Force One, and then you're just flying, you don't know where?
There was a sense of this was the fog of war. In this case, the fog was as thick as that smoke billowing through lower Manhattan by that point. We knew there were attacks on the building. We heard that the Pentagon was in flames. The fear was, how broad did this go? The enormity of it was absolutely lost on us, because on Air Force One, the only information we had as we flew for hours was a hazy picture on the television screens that are embedded in the front bulkhead wall of each cabin on Air Force One. And the president, in his cabin up forward, was furious and frustrated. He had 3 secure phone lines, and the higher we flew for safety, the more of those lines deteriorated. One of the most telling quotes from the president came as we arrived back to Washington about 7 o'clock at night, and the president looked out the window of Marine One at the burning Pentagon, and he told the person next to him, "This is what war looks like in the 21st century."
When you look back at your long career, September 11th is the most memorable?
The Christmas day that the Soviet Union ceased to exist, and I spent all Christmas on the White House lawn reporting on that, is something that changed the geography, the geopolitical map of the globe. 9/11 was the day that marked, after already 25 years of covering Washington, a day in which I felt I had to pull in all my resources, keep my focus, and remember that this is the future, a defining moment for the entire nation. And it wasn't until 7 o'clock that night, when I got back to the White House, my pool duties were over. The president was about to address the nation. And I got an email from my kids at college who said their classmate was on the 93rd floor of the first tower. And at that moment, I crumpled into my chair at the White House and I cried. It all had a human face.
People often talked about, in the aftermath, and continue to, the idea of we will not forget. What do you feel that Americans ought to remember on this 20th anniversary?
On September 11th, the country came together in a way we hadn't seen in a long time, helping each other. There was a sense of trying to protect your neighbors, take in people, trying to preserve what was best about the society that we had that was under attack. I think if I could tell my grandchildren, who are preschool, what they should know about America and the impact of September 11th, is that this is a country that needs to pull together and act as one united United States and a society that upholds principles of democracy and fairness and freedom. And that has to be our core. And that's what the important lesson of 2 decades taught me, and what I hope they can carry forward.
Our thanks to Ann Compton for sharing her front row seat to history with us.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.